each of us are in the process of trying to figure out what our food journey is. I mean, like you wouldn't be involved in sugar addiction or food freedom had you not been concerned about your journey, because most of us have started in a place and then we're trying to, I don't even know that we know ultimately what our goals are. Some people might have a goal of health. Some just kind of have a goal of weight management. And then for me, I think I've come into the space mainly because of the historical perspective. And that is what has helped me with motivating me to kind of change my behavior around food. So I think that I can just start by saying that I hope that whenever you see my name or Sugar Mode Off or anything out there, I hope that you can still kind of find these overall arching themes, which are that I have a concern for people, I have a compassion for people, but I also feel like there's a need to kind of break down the history and the harm that sugar has done to communities of color. That sometimes I think is a little bit louder depending on the spaces that I'm in, but when I think about what that really means, I'm just like, wow, it's not even really about Black and brown people as much as I think, because it really is about the liberation that we're all seeking when we try to come into this food space, because we're all going to interact and intersect with these things that are, that are with us every day. We're all going to come across something throughout the day that's going to trigger us emotionally or either trigger our behaviors. So, and it's just strange that for me, I kind of think that, like you, I'm evolving. I truly am evolving. Each time I get a chance to talk, I have an opportunity to really think a little bit more and then learn how to articulate my story a little bit better. And what I want to do is just sort of give you like 4 of these themes or tips or tools or strategies that I think might be helpful for you as you are approaching your food journey. Some of you may be new into this program. Some of you may have been dealing with food and food addiction for your life, since you were a kid. But these are the 4 things that I feel that are critical. I'll highlight them now and then I will talk about them. So one is you must start with a level of curiosity. And I'd like to say this is like something that's so important when we talk about empowering you as an individual. 2, find something that historically pushes you. So for many of us, it could be our health could be a historical piece. For me, it's the history of African American people. But I think it's so important that you find something that pushes you historically. The other thing is always find a way to figure out how sugar harms your health and stay connected, stay grounded with that principle. And then the 4th thing is try to figure out a way how you are going to push the information out to other people who need the similar type of motivation. So I think a lot about history, probably, I think because it's so hard for me to imagine that we, because if you start looking at history so much, which that's what I kind of feel like I've been doing within the last 3 to 4 years. I had no interest in history before. That time I actually probably could have failed a couple of history courses because I felt like the subject alone was so boring. But the things that I've learned about history is that there's always a narrative that is written. And so, and in those narratives that I'm understanding that are written, I understand too that there's a struggle for truth, and then there's also a struggle for denial. When I look at sugar, I see those things. I see the struggle for truth. That's why you're enrolled in SUGARx Global. That's why this platform is so important, because there's a struggle for truth. On the backside of that, there's a struggle for denial. You've got 70 different names of sugar. Some of them will tell you that it's 0 sugar when we know right well that that is indeed sugar. And at least our body and our brain is going to treat it like it's sugar. So I'm hoping that what we'll talk about today is going to empower your journey, and that you will begin to develop some ways that you can start taking some of this information back to those who, what I call the reach, those who, that for me, I think we can reach them, but they're considered unreachable. And then, there's no ownership in your journey without liberation. So if you don't start to tackle this information, I'm sorry that this camera does that sometimes. If you don't start to tackle this information, use it for yourself, and then push it out to other people and help them, then I kind of say it's like I don't want to be in the party by myself, being the only one that's happy and feeling like I'm food freedom. I just don't even like that. I really like to be around people who are like-minded, who have clear perceptions, impulse, sort of free, and who understand where they're going tomorrow. So let me go back to number one. What do I mean by trying to approach this subject of sugar with curiosity? Um, I think it's critical, because when you start to look at your journey with sugar and the information that you're receiving in this program, it's so important for you to ask why. Not so much that you're asking why on every time you get a chance to in class or whatever, but you're asking why for yourself. Because some of these principles about sugar, when we talk about the inflammation and we talk about, circulation, those are things that you can go and seek the information on your own. You can go to so many different platforms, and you can then start saying, oh, that's why Anna said that. That's why Judy said that. Why Dave said that. So once you start to not just allow the information to be told to you, but then you start using it in a way that you are curious, and then you start seeking ways and avenues, then that's where you're starting to take those steps to become liberated. So the next thing is the historical push. I'm going to talk about history and how it's impacted me. It may not be useful for you, but I think if you can look at your journey with food, there's always a history. There's always a history of family having done something, family having a history of harm, family having a history of obesity, family having a history of diabetes. There's always some history. So, and for me, and for Black and brown folks, let me just say that what I have found to be something that seems to motivate me more so than anything is looking at the history of harm. So when I think about the stories of slavery, and just knowing that we can pretty much say that the sugar industry probably wouldn't exist without the free labor of Black and brown folks. We can say that. There's enough books out there. There's enough history out there that's already been told. Um, for me, the journey kind of started to change and to become real for me once I went to the sugar plantations. And when I started looking at in and around a plantation and listening to the stories of really the master's narrative, I could not help but to wonder, where was my narrative? Like, I know that if we can say that the work was being done by African Americans, then where's my story? So then we go back to that thing where I'm really becoming a little bit more curious as to what has happened. And that's when I started to learn that sugar was the worst type of work that any slave could have been committed to. And the average lifespan of anyone that was committed to sugar slavery was about 5 to 7 years. And so when I think about that, um, and using history as a way to push me into saying, oh, well, this whole sugar thing is really, it's true. Yeah, I need to look at sugar in a way to where I understand that it's harmful. But for me, I look at the historical push, which means that this thing has been harmful for years. If we go back to the beginning of slavery, if we go back to the beginning of Christopher Columbus in 1492, what he brought over was sugar. And so you look at all the different areas in the Americas, and who was made to do the work. It was brown bodies that was made to do the work, Black bodies that was made to do the work. And so then just recently, last week, I was down. I'd like to say that I want to stay connected with the Sugarland 95 story for as long as I live. But I was down in Sugarland, Texas last weekend, and they were doing a memorial for the Sugarland 95. And for me, it's really disturbing to have such a strong history of sugar land sugar planting in the state of Texas, and to know that I've gone to really good schools, and I've taken Texas history, and never once did I recall that there was a history spoken or a test question even that was on the topic of sugarland or either sugar in Texas. So what I do know now to this day is that Texas had over 45 large sugar plantations. And what I do know now is that Sugarland, Texas was a place where not only was it the start of the imperial sugar that we know that we keep on our table today, um, but it was also one of the biggest sugar plantations that after Reconstruction, then it turned into a prison system. And so looking at, I guess, the disturbing news of finding out history in such a way that now I'm almost 50, um, and not knowing that history has been harmful. Not so much that I even would have connected the two to say that sugar was a problem for my health, but just the historical piece. And so, I said before that anyone who was committed to sugar slavery, their average lifespan was 5 to 7 years. But if they were committed to convict leasing, then their average lifespan was 2 to 3 years, and some less than that, but the average lifespan was 2 to 3 years. And, when I think about how systems and systemic racism and why it exists today, it's because we have this history of denial. I mean, had the people who were not excavating the land said, oh, I think these are human bones that we're coming across, I think that's a human bone. Had they not pressed the issue, pushed it forward, how much more historical erasure would have been done? And then I look at the sugar industry today. You're telling me this is zero sugar in that Dr. Pepper? So, I would like to say that it really does become disturbing. But this is why you have to have that deep need for curiosity and then start owning your sugar journey on your own. So when I think about the health aspect of sugar, it becomes even more alarming, honestly, because to have been a nurse for over 23 years now, and then to see so many people with diabetes, so many people with hypertension, so many people who are obese, and then knowing so much about the health aspect of sugar is really disturbing, because the people who really know, the researchers who've done the work and who've studied rats in the labs and who've looked at populations, they can say without a doubt that too much sugar will create a way for you to get into one of these categories. And then once you reach this category of what we call metabolic syndrome, then you are opening yourself up to all other types of diseases. So it becomes really important that we string along our curiosity, a historical aspect, and then our health, and tie these pieces of information into one. And then the last piece is I'd like to say, how do you stop yourself from becoming a sugar preacher? Because that's what I had an issue with in the beginning. Once I had so much information and knowledge about sugar, I promise you, I was the person that I felt like I could meet you on the outside behind the bush, and then here I am, like, don't do sugar. Well, as you know, with all things, that's one good way to run off people, and I say all the time, like, I want to be able to influence people who are not like me, who have no desire to quit sugar or to reduce their sugar. I want to be sitting at the table with them and eating and conversing with them and seeing how I can influence their behavior. Because it is important. I mean, when we talk about, world peace, I could really think about just putting sugar and pushing it off the table, and then, like, there's the solution. Here we go. But I don't know if without the curiosity on your own, that you will gain the liberation that you deserve. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is really about you at the end of the day. It really is about you. And for me, one way to have that ownership was to go and connect my history which it's just kind of sad. I mean, I could talk about history all day, but it's sad that, um, like I said, there's a struggle for truth, then there's a struggle for denial. When I think about, just as much as I'm struggling to find the truth in something, I know that there's another person over there that's trying to completely erase that history. So I don't know if you need more from me. I can give you more, but I really would like to open things up for Q&A if that's okay at this point.
That's definitely okay. And I did post just one article about the Sugar Land 95. It's an amazing history, and I don't think that we can ignore it. And I think that's one way that we can, help people see. For me, I mean, as a recovering drug addict, Shun, I think about all the people that just get killed and trafficked and whatever because of drug addiction, and the modern day slavery that's going on right now because of drug addiction and drug cartels. The people that get murdered in Mexican towns and cities, beheaded and, thrown over bridges for people to see. And I think that, that's an impetus for me to not want to use again. Right. And I think with sugar, tobacco, almost anything that's addictive, there's a human cost that is undeniable and unbelievable. So I absolutely love history. I'm a big history nerd and always have been. So I love when you talk about that piece of it. And I love like the medical history piece, which I would like you to share a little bit more about that, like looking at your family tree, because you've discussed that before. Yeah. And then Edie, you can go ahead and ask your question after Shun talks about that.
So yes, so for me, I will like to say to you that I just had no, like, my desire didn't come from a health desire. It wasn't that approach at all. It should have been, because I was a nurse, or I am a nurse, but it wasn't. I don't know why I didn't have a desire to change my behavior. I think because I just didn't know sugar was a problem. But when I look at myself, I'm like, okay, well, I had the numbers to clearly show that I was near obesity. Actually, I was obese at that point. So let me put that, to make that real clear. Had problems with my cholesterol, but not to where I had to take medications, but I was borderline, as we can say in our community, borderline hypertension. And also, I didn't ever get to the point to where I was borderline diabetic, but I could see where that was coming. It was clearly going to be there. So, and when we look at those things, those four things, I'm sure you've already talked about this, but that's metabolic syndrome. Your weight, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and then also diabetes, when you're looking at those things. But if you have three of those things, that's what they call metabolic syndrome. And so what I think is important is that I took my health history and I said, a lot of times we like to look at our history in our family and just say, kind of like, a lot of people will do like, oh, my grandmother was at this age when she died. But I wanted to see, like, okay, what about our diagnosis, And so when I go back to my family tree, my family history, I'll just focus on my mom's side. My mom has a history of hypertension. Obesity is something that is very, it's something that you kind of keep off the table when in our community. But I think clinically, she would be diagnosed as obese. And then her mother has a history, or had a history of diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and then she died of cervical cancer. And then when I looked at my great-grandmother had a history of what they would call like a late onset hypertension and a late onset of diabetes, because she died, I believe, at the age of like 93 or 94. And she developed those diagnoses really late. And so for me, I think I'm like, how could my great-grandmother really, let's just say that's living, right? Lived to 90 something. Then my grandmother lived to, I believe, 70, I think, or maybe 65, or it was 70 or something. And then my mom. And then, when you look at what I think, I'm like, oh, I wonder if it was that whole thing about sugar, because sugar wasn't widely used by my great-grandmother. She cooked and made food from what she was in her backyard, and what she farmed. So, and then there was a big change in between my great-grandmother to my grandmother in how we were eating. So I think about that history all the time, and it's something that, I don't have the time to research it, but I just say, if I'm going to evolve, I'm going to have to be more like my great grandmother and eat like she was eating, which was food that was really close to the home. And something that I kind of always talk about is the difference between food and fuel. I think you can label anything as food, but there's a clear distinction between food and fuel, because the fuel is not going to we won't be slouchy or lazy or sleepy or slumpy after that. But food, you some of the food you will be. You will be. I don't know if that answered your question, Anna.
Definitely. I think a lot of times we think so much about ourselves that we forget, like, let's look at what sugar's done to our family. So thank you. I think that's very useful. And also the food versus fuel. I think that's just so simply and lovely the way that you put it, and the adjectives you use, like slumpy and all of that. I just love it. It's just so down to earth. So thank you. Edie.
Shun, I'm so excited to finally get to meet you face to face. Hi. We talked on the phone.
Yes.
Okay, let me tell you how I feel right now. My favorite quote is from Alice in Wonderland, and she's the queen of somebody says, "Why, I have as many as 6 impossible thoughts before breakfast." And that's how I feel right now talking to you, because I'm like, oh my gosh, there are so many projects I would love to support you and get behind. I mean, I can see this. First of all, I think there's some historical kind of books coming out on the topic, but I would like to see a simplified, like layman's person, not a super technical read on the history. And then also what to do about it, like the practical, like you do on your Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know, do you have a book project? I also would love talking points. I've got 6 impossible ideas. So I'm like trying to organize my thoughts right here. Yeah, I just think just everything you spoke to right now, if I could just rattle off some of the statistics, that would be helpful for me, on the history. And sidebar, I was listening recently, I got to meet Amy Berger last weekend, keto conference. And she has a book about Alzheimer's. My husband's high risk genetically with APOE4. And so she directed me to one of her YouTube videos on APO4. And she starts out that lecture by giving an explanation about some of these genes have a reason for the genetic predisposition that were beneficial. And she even explained why sickle cell anemia had its benefit. I don't remember what it was, but I can tell you hypertension was because it was so that in the Sahara, where there was water very limited, and you didn't have access to water, it was so hot, you needed to retain your water. So genetically, talking about your grandmother, there's that. But what she discussed and explained, and I've heard, is for like the APOE44 genotype. Today's modern environment is the worst match to that. And so what we're talking about here for you and for many Blacks is the modern American diet being a horrible match to your genetic predisposition, on top of the slavery issue. So I guess I loved also your interview on Clubhouse, Fork in the Road. And I know Anna brought up the idea of a documentary, which I think would be amazing. And then, how can you get your voice bigger to some of these podcasts like Dr. Mark Hyman and the ones that have gazillions of listeners? Because you have such a gift at speaking on this message. And I want to know how I can support you. I want to hear more about.
I think you're doing it. I really do. You know what? I don't think anything's just because it is happening. I really think that the best thing I can do is to continue to do the work, and then if you see a way that you can help me, then just tell me. Because part of the issue, I think that many people who create communities will just say that these are confidential communities or these are support communities, is that when you're so busy doing the work, you really kind of forget that there's other things that could be done or that you've got time to do. And so I really like to say that, I always say, I want you to catch me working. I want you to catch me working. You know what I'm saying? Because I think that's the only way that I can prove to people, first of all, that this sugar, I'm going to curse y'all. So if you're okay, this sugar shit ain't fake, But the other part too, is that I think that, I think sometimes we sit in the space of conversations too long, and I don't want to be one of those people who is wasting my time on conversations. I really want to be on the ground doing the work. Because it's just like when we talk about reparations, why do I have to wait for somebody to come up with a plan on reparations? I don't need to wait for that. Actually, I can do this work in the way that I know how. you know,
Yeah.
on my own. And so what I hope is, you know, it's just, you know, it's very clear to me that when I study the civil rights movement, Black and brown folks didn't get nowhere by themselves. We had allies, you know, and allies come by way of helping, you know, us to message or to spill out the knowledge or to write a book, you know, because I've been told, you know, to write a book, and I've been working on writing a book, but, you know, at the same time, I've got to figure out, you know, who to represent these pages of what are just my personal notes to, you know. So I just think it's important for, you know, people like you who have the resources and the knowledge, information, support, just to say, hey, sister, connect with her, you know, because you will catch me doing my work more often than vacations. My vacations are all going to be centered around someplace where there was sugar and harm, you know. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want all your apparel, that's for sure. So definitely I'm gonna order some of those. But yeah, you and I have discussed how I was born in New Orleans, and you and I have visited some of the same sugar plantations, and I was really, really brokenhearted upon those visits. And this might be too much for a public forum, but soon after I met with some people from our church, and because I found it in my family lineage that we had slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like I wanted to break that generational bond and curse with that. So I went and I got prayed over for that, just to renounce that. And so it's just so exciting to meet you, because I just feel like, man, this is just something I feel really passionate about, because I feel like it's my roots too, you know?
Yeah, it is. I mean, if we're here, it is in some way, you know. So yeah, I think, you know, and honestly, you know, we talk about, I think about this more often than not. If we could create some discussions around race and where we are today, the whole discussion could be had around sugar. You could look at sugar in slavery and sugar in today, and we could talk about topic after topic, you know, slavery itself, prison system today, health, big pharma, all of those things could be covered in a way to where you could talk about the inequalities, you know, and it's clear to me, you know. So I think, you know, let's just stay connected, and
Yeah.
the biggest thing is just making something happen with what we're talking about today.
I love that you said, you know, I'm going to do the work. You're a nurse, and you're talking about the ICU. You're talking about triage, like Bitten always talks about, and that's what we're about. You know, we want triage. We can't wait for sugar addiction to become a diagnosis to do something about it. People are flipping dying now, you know. And it's so funny because tonight my topic for our RA 2.0 is necessity, and it's very necessary to be on the ground doing stuff, you know. But I do have questions for you about your clothing line, and I cannot find a link. Could you put a link in the chat? And Vedette, why don't you have David, or have David order a t-shirt for you, and he'll bring it over to Europe, because he's coming over to the UK for all of the stuff, you know, that Jen Unwin's putting on. He's going to be a speaker there. Are you going to be there?
Me?
Yes.
I wished. I've got a baby graduating from high school this
So do I.
Yes, I know.
Go next time.
Yeah, well, and then I've got one graduating next year. So it's so funny. I have two back to back.
Well, that's nice though. That's exciting. But you know, I think Shun, you're so right. It's like, we have to take away the shame of talking about sugar addiction. We have to take away the shame of talking about our history. We have to be able to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly for healing to occur in any disease. And this history is a disease, really. You know, if we don't look, if we don't, you know, if we don't talk about it, it's like it doesn't exist, but it does. You know, and I think it's like, to me, it's equivalent to looking away from a suffering addict, or saying that they're a horrible person when really they're just in the throes of addiction. It's the same kind of like thing that keeps the whole thing ugly and down. And we can get so free if we can just talk and be okay with, you know, feeling our feelings and going through it. And I think that was just such a great and lovely conversation between you and Edie. And I'm glad you guys are connected. And I know Edie's heart. So
yes.
So I know she'll be a big supporter of you. And in the book idea, you know, I mean, you can self-publish on Amazon pretty damn easy. We can talk.
Okay.
Even like a small children's book talking about the ABCs of sugar would be a good start. You know, and simple things like that. I think that would be some fabulous things that you could do very easily from material you already have, you know. Danny.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us. I wonder if you could clarify a little bit. You said that the number 2 thing was what pushes me. And I was intrigued by that. And then you said you went on the historical route, but what are other kind of things that you were thinking of when you think of what pushes me?
Well,
What did you mean by that?
when I think about, because I think it's just so interesting that most people they come to sugar because they hear about it in a way like, oh, I heard that I had a friend who was on this sugar-free diet and they lost weight. I'm amazed that that wasn't me, because not that I was really into the fads or anything, but I was always kind of in earshot of listening to somebody talk about keto, paleo, or whatever. But none of those words ever struck me. Not even sugar-free diet. That didn't make any. I wasn't going to do anything with that. But when I think about like historical pushes, because there's a history that we often that is so connected to what we do today, you have to find out what that is and take that back as far as you can. So, for example, the people who struggle with alcoholism in their family or for themselves, if you look at that and you say, I'm going to look at alcoholism and I'm going to see, was my mom an alcoholic? Okay. And if she was, more often than not, what we do is we've already judged mom for being an alcoholic or not being a good mom. But what triggered mom to be an alcoholic? That's the thing, like those types of historical pushes. So so when I use the historical push, I use the pieces of looking at slavery and saying, I'm taking this sugar story and I'm going to go back to look at not only my family history as it relates to their health, but I'm going to look at the history of African Americans to see like what type of harm sugar has done to us. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's what I mean. It's just looking at history in every way you can, because when the first thing you'll do when you go to the doctor's office is they're going to ask you about your family history. And what we know a little bit more when we talk about sugar now today is, I'm not going to develop diabetes because my grandma had it. I'm going to develop diabetes because I'm eating the way my grandma was cooking, and that's the way I'm cooking today. So that's what I mean in using that historical push.
There's always that like one thing that like drives us as individuals. Like I put up we're doing this journaling challenge, and Danny, I know you reflected on the triggers point and what you were saying. That's like your trigger. That's specific to Danny. So how do we use that trigger to drive us forward, to create momentum, to whatever? Then that's the inertia for you, right? So like, because the inertia for my recovery is for me, it's not for you.
Right.
And they're all different, and they have to be specific. And those are one of the things like, one of the pictures I saw early in recovery was a picture of a lion and he's behind him in the distance, and it's all blurred out. You can see a cub, and it says, I was going to give up, but then I saw who was watching. So like that, for me, I have these little kids. Like whenever I feel like I'm done, I always think about that picture, and it just propels me forward. So I just think about what is that thing, that one thing that matters to you and only you, and then allow that to be a momentum for building recovery. That's what I got out of it when I heard you speak. Make it personal,
Yeah, it really is about that, Danny. And that's what I think that is so important about like owning this journey. Let me just say that I don't think that if I hadn't have found these things to make me seem a little bit obsessive about the topic of sugar, that I would be successful. So, the historical piece for me is the thing that helps me to say, well, I've heard about, let me just look at how the story in Sugar Land, Texas impacts where I live today. Like, were there any plantations near where I'm from today? And so this curiosity sort of goes with me everywhere. I don't put it down. And I think that helps me with the why I'm not going to have sugar today. I really do. And that's why if you've got that little thing, I bet we could talk about it and then figure out how to put it into your food journey. Because you got to think about, like, this is a relationship. Sugar and food and this whole thing, it's a relationship. But just like a good relationship, it's a commitment. So I can choose to cheat on my husband, not today because he's off, but I could choose to cheat on him any given day. He could choose to cheat on me any given day. But the commitment is what keeps us together and keeps us sound. So what kind of things do I have? A ring as a symbol, a t-shirt as a symbol, empowering me, empowering others, informing others. This ring informs others. She's married. It empowers me. Oh, well, whew, that guy looks good, you know, but I got a ring and I got 2 kids. And you have to keep things like that around you when you're trying to make this food journey your own. Because the advertising, the marketing is so much stronger than what we've got on our own. So you keep it off your palate, don't have it unless you want more of it. Okay. Because the only thing you're doing is just creating that, oh, okay, well, if I can have a little bit more, then I can just have a little bit more. I wanted to talk about this that I think is kind of important. One of the things that I started to do was whenever I decided to do what I call the slippery slope, the thing that we could say, oh, you know, you can do that. That's not really sugar, but it is sugar. Is I decided that I would just kind of keep like a little my journal, but I was going to make like, instead of me trying to articulate this and make it to where other people could understand it, I was just like, I'm just going to keep it simple, something to where it can like help me to understand. So for example, the other week I had a tuna sandwich, and sandwich implies that I had bread, right? Okay, so what I said I was going to do was I'm just going to see what the physical implications of having those 2 pieces of bread. Okay. The physical, not emotional, physical. So what I decided to do was, like I said, after having the tuna sandwiches, I noticed that I had these little zines. And this is my little, so I'm sorry if you get to see my junk stuff, but I don't know if you can see it, but the little zines right there, the little zines were behind my face. I don't know if that's clear or not. And they literally, I had little zines right here, like little zines. Because if I'm gonna try, if I'm gonna do, then I need to know what the response is, the physical thing. Emotional, I could get tied down in that all day long. So, and I try to keep this book with me wherever I go, but I also don't even try to deal with sugar on any level too, because I know that that's, you know, it's easy to justify sugar. But when you're really trying to stay away from it, you need to know that there's 1,000 reasons why you should not do it. You know, I don't know if that makes sense to y'all or not, but I just, you know,
you gave yourself an invitation to investigate, is what I call it.
Yeah.
You just said, you know what, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to look at it honestly and see what happens. Right. And I think sometimes that's part of the journey anyway.
The journey.
You know? And you talk about not focusing on feelings, and Bitten does tell us focus on energy. And that has everything to do with how our body feels. Sluggish isn't a feeling. Slumpy isn't a feeling. It's an energy thing, isn't it?
Right. That's so right.
You know, and hooking your history. When I found out that sugar is the gateway drug, I was so damn mad. I can't even tell you, because I was bottle fed and given, you know, Tootsie Pops when I was, you know, teething, you know, and I started using at 9 years old, and that is just criminal to me. So I think for me, that's a personal thing for me that helps me, if that helps at all, Danny. And then finding out that Robert Lustig calls sugar the alcohol of the child.
Yeah.
That's just like, wow, you know, what are we doing as a society?
And I just think too that it's just so important that you own it. Just own it. I think part of the problem when we don't own it is that you get to sit it in someone else's bucket and say, I'm gonna have this person help me work this out. No, you work it out. You come up with a solution. You tell somebody what happened to you, and then you don't do it. I mean, it's about the stop sign that was built, you know, for a reason. They put it there for a reason. Now, when you choose to go through that stop sign, that's a personal choice. There's always consequences too. You could either get a ticket or have a wreck. So, when you start taking ownership of your journey, I think that is so critical to healing, because this ain't about nothing else but healing, on so many different levels. I don't even think we are tapping into our best selves until we are healing our brain. I don't care how much talent we've got or whatever. If you are not at that level where your brain is not healed, you just, I don't think we are putting our best selves out there.
You are so right, Shun. And the dopamine reward center is a huge part of it. And yesterday, Anna Lemke was in the HMA class, and she said something so interesting, some new research that talks about how we have a dopamine deficit after we eat something once our brain has been rewired. So we can eat the thing and we get this little bump up of dopamine, but the crash down to the pain side is heavier. And so we have this dopamine deficit that is actually a physical cause for the craving. So you may feel an overwhelming urge to eat something, and it's not really you, it's your body's chemistry. And the only way to get through that is a dopamine fast. We have to stop hitting that reward center over and over again so we can heal.
And Shun, we talk about here at SUGARx Global that we're really not here to motivate, rah, rah, rah. We're here to build on your momentum. I mean, you got to have that within, which is exactly what you were just talking about. You got to make decisions for yourself. No one can do it for you. I wish I could, be Samantha the witch, wiggle my nose and cure everybody, with the little kids out there that I see that are obese at, 4 or 5 years old. It's just makes me sick, but the point is we're really not here to motivate. We're here to work on the momentum and educate.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Well, I have to jet because I've got a sugar to finish up. So anyway, I love you, Shun. Thank you so much.
I love y'all too. Does anyone have any questions though? I'd want to make sure
Yeah, what is the one thing that these people need to hear from you before you leave? Like, what is your lasting overarching message?
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's a doozy.
I think I really do think that if you approach your food journey with this level of curiosity, and compassion, I think that's the way to own it. I think that's the way to own it. Because it's going to be so important that you take yourself from one space to the other, because the more you become liberated from this food issue, that you're actually opening the doors for other people, because it's not just about you. We're talking about when you heal, you are automatically changing what's on your table for Thanksgiving, and that changes your kids and your grandkids and those that are coming after. So I think that's what I would leave with you.